going on and on, how longevity threatens the future. It is a truly thought-provoking read, and I'm hoping you all leave here, if you haven't got a copy already, with a copy. The only reason I turned up was so I could be first in line to get the signed copy, which she kindly sent to me in the mail the other day. Now, the book explores a range of challenging questions relevant to all of us today, from the very young to the very, very old, and all ages in between. As Dan said, this is Lucinda's fifth book, and as he also pointed out, she does like to prompt, she sees them as lively provocations to think more clearly about the forces that shape our society and whether those forces are working to make our world more or less civilised. I did love her last book. Can everybody hear me all the way to that?
Yeah.
That's good, okay, right. It was a bitingly funny but deadly serious critique, to quote the title, 21st Century Virtues and How They're Failing Our Democracy. If you loathe those egregiously self-promoting posts that people put on LinkedIn as their profiles, you'll love that book. And in her latest offering, she challenges the very idea of longevity as a virtue, which we've all been taught to believe is a great thing. And we're going to be going on and on now for 45 minutes or so, talking about it. And so, I mean, my opening question is, Lucinda, what's not to like about longevity when Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are singing its praises? At a military parade in Beijing last year, they were caught on a hot mic praising the virtues of living on and on. Xi reckoned it might be possible this century for people to live to 150. And not to be outdone, Vlad upped the ante by saying advances in biotech and continuous transplants could allow people to achieve immortality. He was heard saying, the longer you live, the younger you become. So what's not to like?
Well, there's certainly a lot not to like when we think about some of our world leaders today. One of the comments that people used to make and now shouldn't is people say, well, he can't last forever. And they aim to last forever. People that we would run a mile from.
The tech bros are right into it. They're putting millions into life advancement technology.
Exactly.
Yes.
Barack Obama said last year, 80% of the world's problems are caused by old men hanging on, fearing death and insignificance, and they won't let go. And in fact, I looked up how many countries are ruled by men in their 70s or older. Let's list the countries. America, Russia, China, Israel, India. There would have been Iran, but they killed him. But no doubt they'll find somebody else. And that will be even worse because he will have even longer to live. So
his son just makes the boomer demographic, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And you know, the frightening thing about, there's many frightening things about it, but for me, after I finished the book, I've had this question in my mind, why do they want to live forever? Like really, why do they want to live forever? And I thought, it's because they've got nothing to leave behind except hatred. And so they have to live forever to avoid being judged. And I thought, but the rest of us don't have to have that fear. We're all living good life. Compared to them, we're all absolutely fantastic. So
we're in Balmain.
We're in Balmain, home of the brave. So so the other problem with these guys is how they get. You know, they talk about harvesting organs, and you know, you just have this vampiric image of them harvesting young organs, young people's plasma. Brian Johnston, one of the tech bros, I don't know, I've watched it so you don't have to, this most vile documentary called The Man Who Wants to Live Forever. And he starves himself, he doesn't have any pleasures, and he's now got his son volunteering to give his plasma or his blood or both or something, probably his organs eventually, so that Brian Johnston can live forever. Why, I ask? And how does that kid feel? It's kind of, in a way, it's a great image of certain things that are going on in modern life about harvesting and taking advantage of the younger generations.
So, and well, let's get to that then. Why is this increasing longevity that we're looking at a problem for each and every one of us?
Yeah, well, it was interesting. When I started writing it, it was prompted by my own experiences and those of many women doing caregiving for their parents. And I was a bit confused because I thought, well, isn't this what previous generations did? But what's different now is this extra length of life. So we are one of the world's longest living countries, and that is a credit to our fantastic medical system and peace and prosperity, and a credit to medical advances and public health. But the other factor that I saw is a statistic that we're also one of the countries with the biggest gap between our lifespan and our health span. So all these, and let's face it, mostly daughters, not only daughters, I wish to say, they were doing all that caring. So that's the first cohort I looked at, who are really suffering the strains of longevity. Then they can't dye their hair pink or come out or leave their husband or run away from home or go trekking or anything because they have these duties to their parents. And I was really struck by these small tragedies, quiet tragedies unfolding all around. Women I know trying to work, trying to look after their own kids, trying to have their own life, sacrificing so much. So that was the first cohort I saw suffering.
And so medical care has been great at keeping us going, but it's a case of sort of bugger the quality, feel the duration, isn't it? And that's obviously created an enormous societal burden, and as you point out, that's a burden that just doesn't fall to the aged care sector, it falls to those people who have to be the volunteers to be that guardian, if you like.
The guardian role. One woman wrote to me and said she's got the power of attorney, she's got all these, there's all these legal formal duties. It's incredibly onerous and stressful, but it's also that sort of constant recycling through medical appointments and other things. But I think one of the main points I make in the book is we urgently need to make a transition away from life at all costs to living well and dying well. That is the emergency, actually, I think. That's what I've come to conclude is the most important thing. And whenever I think about all these problems, I think, why aren't the doctors talking to us about this? They know this. If you talk to any frank doctor, they will tell you, oh yes. So many people I know have stories of a parent, especially that older generation who were used to doing anything a doctor told them. If the doctor said it was you could have your hip operation or you could try this or that, they would do it. They would do whatever they were told, even though that might just actually give a little blip of extra life in increasingly feeble condition and frailty and ill health and suffering, like genuine suffering along the way. So our medical system is now just on this cycle, and the intergenerational report of 2023 said that 40% of future additional spending for this country will go on ageing, and that includes pensions and aged care, superannuation subsidies. They have a new category in there, I noticed, called end-of-life care. So that's sort of long palliative care, very long protracted palliative care. So we have a future Australia to 2063 where all that expense that's going to keeping people alive with a poor quality of life is not going to childcare, science, education, innovation, defence, God help us. So you know, we are used to we used to be afraid to talk about these issues in a plain way because it seems hurtful or unkind. But I think we are not the same cohort as that older generation of my parents, and we should be having these discussions. And I don't think a government will lead it. I think they need it to come from the people.
But it's also a case of medical technology coming hard up against from very deep-seated cultural values around the sanctity of life at all costs, which is also tied up with religious belief and so forth.
Yes, I think
it's a very hard thing to tackle, isn't it?
Well, no, because we're an increasingly secular country, and I think we're moving past that. I really believe that. I think we've changed before.
But democracy is run by the people who turn up, and the people who will turn up most loudly and forcibly are those with deep-seated belief, and they're the ones who keep standing in the way of right-to-die legislation and so forth.
Yes, they do. They run the slippery slope argument, and I'm a speechwriter, and the slippery slope argument is called a rhetorical fallacy. It's rubbish. Oh, what, we're going to start having murder all over the place? I don't think so. I think we're a pretty common sense country. We're behind other countries, and look, I'm saying this tonight, but I don't wish to stand up and say I'm going to start being a crusader for this. This was just the outcome of looking at the facts and trying to think clearly about what does this mean. And what it means to me is we can do better and a more compassionate outcome for all of us than my poor father had, all the falls, all the treatment. My mother was... So many people have written to me and said, my parents are bored and ready to die. They're just bored now. And we've all had good lives, right? Because we're in Balmain. We must have. And so... why would you want to... There's a guy called Daniel Kahneman who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. I don't know if you know him. He came up with this great term called peak end experience. And that means... I know that. We're not going there. When he was talking about this, what he was referring to is the way humans judge the quality of an experience by how it concludes. And so if you're like me, that made me really think, because I thought, oh gosh, all these relationships I had which were perfectly happy but ended when he broke off with me, I have always characterised as complete fuck-ups. And that was fucked, and that was just a waste of my life, and I can't believe I did that. It's like, maybe there is another way. Anyway, true to that, Kahneman had looked after his wife with Alzheimer's for years, and at 90 he wasn't dying, he was in okay health, frail, but fine. He just flew to Switzerland, went to a clinic and died. And he said he didn't want to do that. He just didn't see why he should be suffering. He was ready. That seemed to me a very calm and sane thing to do. Most people won't want to do that.
You've got some interesting statistics in how long, because we're living longer, how long people live in a state of ill health or infirmity.
Yeah, so we're second to the United States for our longevity, but we're also, not second to the United States, we're in the top 10 of longevity, just full stop, sometimes as high as 3, sometimes 5, but we're second only to the United States for the years lived in with chronic disease and disability. And so a very eminent scientist explained to me, who may or may not be here, that it was because we've had a very high industrialised food system. So like Britain and like America, we've had that kind of food system. We've eaten junk food, huge amounts of junk food. But unlike America, we have this brilliant medical system. So it's a medical system that's fantastic at keeping you alive. And it's 12 years on average. And I was a bit shocked by that. I thought, really, 12 years? And then I read the statistic that 1 in 12 Australians over 65 has dementia. I know. And that was from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, their statistics. So...
Can you repeat that stat? Sorry. But you know, it's sometimes it's like that. But however, if only, I mean, there must be some medical miracle going on around the White House when they've got a 79, near 80-year-old man surviving entirely on Macca's.
Why do you think he looks so relaxed, though? He's on so many drugs, obviously, as well as being senile. Yes.
So
I don't know that for sure, clearly. That is my opinion.
So, and you only have to look at the hands, which they constantly want to photograph to see how sort of marked his hands.
Stephen has a kind of running...
That's right, about the hands. So, because we've now got this ageing baby boomer generation, and it's what the oldest of the baby boomers are hitting 80. The youngest of the baby boomers are now well into their 60s, which is in fact the two people sitting up front here. They're either well into retirement or they're hanging on to gigs that perhaps they should have retired from. That's we talk about that. I mean, I think you've got some great statistics about the ASX and who's running it, either at board level or at executive level.
Yes. So I can't think why, but there's a whole lot of old men in Australia who want to hang on as well. And their ASX 300 now has fewer directors under 50 than before, than some years ago, and it's got more directors with tenure of over 20 years. In other words, there's an entrenchment, and it's not hard to see them. There's a great horde of them. So you have, we've entrenched an idea of an older age for board directors and chairs of companies. And I think we benchmark a little bit. So then they say, oh, well, a managing director that's 55, they're just a spring chicken, right? And then that cascades down. And so what we're seeing is young people being locked out of roles that they are really ready for because the older generation has decided that they're still young. And I honestly, whenever I see those big companies saying there's no productivity and sacking all their young workers, I just say maybe you should sack yourselves. And I spoke to a journalist the other day and she said, actually I was at a board, at an AGM, and one of the directors actually said, yes, that AI, my grandson showed me that.
That's right. They're still helping them with the remote controls. Exactly. They still haven't got their hands around that.
No. So that's just one example of this kind of stranglehold. The other area that is interesting is there was an article that you might have read. It sort of went around. People loved it. They said, oh, you know, the generations are moving through and the younger generations are voting. But what they forgot was these generations are old now. Gen X, Gen Z, right? In fact, the number of voters under the age of 35 in Australia has gone down, not up, since 2007 relative to the 2025 election, 24 election. So we've got a smaller cohort of young people with power, and there's an interesting other example of how that has an impact. In the Voice to Parliament referendum, young people were more than under 25 and under were more than twice as likely to vote yes as people over 75. So there is a split. And I actually, in the Brexit vote as well, the people that wanted to remain in the EU were young people, and they wanted a future. And the people that wanted to leave were older people who wanted to go back to an imagined past. And to me, that says what I think we all know, which is young people, you know, children are our future. Young people are looking ahead, and I think, why aren't we dealing with climate change that well? Why aren't we hurrying? Anyway.
It's also the potency, isn't it, of Make America Great Again, because you're appealing to a whole range of older cohorts that have their own idea of what, romanticised idea of when America was great. This is something that Nick Bryant brings up a lot in his writing, that which cohort are you speaking to? But you can actually speak to a multiple of cohorts over 50 about their idealised idea of what it was like back in the good old days.
Yeah, and that's a fact of the sort of, we don't have the baby boomers are now, first baby boomers are turning 80 this year. So that bulge of people, it's going to get bigger and bigger. And meanwhile, women, I can't think why, don't want to have children. And, you know, and when we think about all the money that's going on ageing, that's not going on childcare and education and other resources to help families, so we risk, we're not a gerontocracy by any means, exactly. And the Parliament's skewed not too old, not too badly, because the Liberal Party collapsed and all the old men at the Liberal Party are now fighting. And there's a lot of younger people that have come into the Parliament. So it's not and there is quite a lot of progressive work going on in this government is trying to do things to deal with this issue, but it's big, and I don't think we won't be successful in making the changes we need unless we all get active.
And sort of moving on to the next chapter, if you like, because we have so many older people still holding the reins, whether in corporate Australia or government Australia, wherever, then that's had instilled a whole generational inequity in policy in a whole range of areas.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah. So young people, someone said, you're talking about discriminating against older people. And the obvious answer to that is we have structural economic discrimination against young people in this country. And I mean, obviously we can talk about the economy. I had free university. They have HECS debt. I was able to afford a house, not a house, an apartment. And young people are completely locked out of what is like the fundamental contract of an Australian life has always been having your own home. That's been the basis of this country, actually, and it's been a really daggy and good thing for us all as a country. It's been a stabilising force. So young people are locked out of that. Stephen and I have talked about, you know, capital gains tax. He knows the economics much better than me. Superannuation subsidies for older people. And so you have a whole lot of benefits and support going for older people and wealthy people, and they're the same people.
Which makes what you've written about quite timely as we lead up to the budget, and depending on how the war impacts the budget, it's certainly impacting our Easter holidays and whether we can drive and so forth. But whether or not Jim Chalmers had sort of alluded to the fact that there'd be significant change to capital gains tax, whether that still goes ahead. But hopefully this book and the discussion about it might sort of urge that along.
He has talked, the government has talked about looking at these issues through an intergenerational lens, and I think that's terrific. The other thing I saw last night, which I didn't put in the book because I wasn't...
You only saw it last night?
Yeah, I only saw it last night. Well, it was about an amendment to the terrible discrimination against young workers.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Wasn't that just disgraceful? 20-year-old. You know, this is just outright discrimination. It is unconscionable. So for those that don't know, 20-year-olds have been paid like teenage part-time wages, not proper adult wages. I think it's hospitality was the area that they were looking at.
It's the distributive trade, the Allied Trades, the shoppies, the Shoppies Union.
Did it. Yeah,
the great old Shoppies Union.
The Shoppies were at it. Well, they need to get the younger members in, don't they? Yeah. So, we've got that sort of massive economic, and that's obviously the biggest part of that discrimination. We've also got obviously that, the cohorts of business, which means that all the opportunities for young people in business are sort of not thwarted completely, but held back all the time when we need to go forward. So Yeah, and I am amazed at the, fortitude and patience of young Australians, because the baby boomers were out there just making their way and forcing their way, and they could do that because they had a weight of numbers.
Well, that's interesting, because let's talk about stacking the deck. Now, whether this was done deliberately, and we should all hang our heads in shame because of it, those of us over the age of 60, but you tell a great story about the referendum back in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
Re the federal judiciary.
Yes. So when I was looking at what I realised was that there's enormous benefits, the way the country had now skewed to benefit older Australians. And I thought, were we always like that? When did this happen? And I looked back and I discovered that in 1977, Australia went to a referendum. There were 4 questions. And one of them was about an end to the life tenure of High Court and federal judges. And I realised that at that point, baby boomers were just turning 30. And they were smart enough to realise that if you want to change the country, you start changing its major institutions. The argument that they put forward was utterly ageist in modern terms. It was you need fresh attitudes, new ideas, vigorous and dynamic courts. I mean, if that's not mean about older people, I don't know what is. And that people should be allowed to practice at the peak of their professional powers. In other words, young people. And you know how Australia voted in that referendum? That was the biggest yes vote in Australian history to end that tenure, 80%. So we were once a country that recognised the value of movement, dynamism in the country.
And the wonderful thing where you think this deck was deliberately stacked is that once the cohort of boomers, the average age, got to 58, they brought in anti-age discrimination legislation.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
It's a coincidence? I think not.
I don't like to believe in conspiracy theories, except yes. But it's true, isn't it? I mean, and ageism is something that we shy away from.
We do, and we...
Except when it applies to people under the age of 25.
Exactly.
Or under the age of 40, probably.
Exactly. Well, one of these arguments, why should young people be paid less and not be able to vote till they're 18, and why can't they drive? And the argument for that is their brain development is not sufficient, that the sort of the judgment and all those skills. So in other words, that's an issue of capability. Now let's look at older drivers on the road. I mean, really? So I was wondering whether I was very mean, and I saw that there was a Medical Association report in 2012, and they were looking at doctors. So I don't know how old your GP is, but I know people that know medicine and they say don't go to an old GP. That's what they say. They said this is what happens. And I took this to heart. A decline in fluid intelligence, problem solving, processing speed, eyesight, hearing and manual dexterity. So think about that next time you go and see a surgeon. Or God help us, your dentist.
Because I love the fact that you quote the German theoretical physicist Max Planck, that science advances one funeral at a time.
Correct. That is correct. Oh look, there are scientists in the room, and we know it's true. I mean, Einstein was 26 when he had his miracle year. Darwin was 22 when he did the voyage, the Great Voyage and the Beagle, and developed the origin of species. And poor old Darwin, he was a coward. He waited, I think, 40 years to publish. He only published because somebody else was going to. And at the end of the origin of species, there's this fantastic section where he says, well, I don't know that, I'm sure not everyone will agree with me, so I look to young and rising naturalists who will look at this with an open mind. That is, science only proceeds one funeral at a time.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not suggesting we get into anything too vigorous here, but I think I think for all of us as we get older, it's really worth reflecting.
There's nowhere
on
for us to do planking here. Not enough room, thank God.
Oh, I have to tell you a story though, speaking of planking. This is completely irrelevant, but I did the audio book for this book, and the team, the fantastic team at Sound Kitchen, gossiped with me afterwards and told me that Tony Abbott had been in doing his, his history of Australia, God help us. And then Bill said to me in wonderment, he said, whenever Tony Abbott took a break, he would come out here and do push-ups.
Yeah.
He wants to live forever too. So just beware.
Get down, give me 50. But it's interesting. Well, it's good to see that they're having fiction in that recording. It's not just all non-fiction.
Nice.
I love that thing because it goes on to say, Max Planck, science advances as sceptical older generations die out, replaced by a new generation familiar with the new ideas. Now, that doesn't just relate to science, or I suppose it does relate to science because it relates to climate change.
Yeah.
And we were going nowhere with climate policy. And when you look at the average age of the people who are resisting any change on climate policy, it really reinforces the Max Planck thesis, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's everywhere. It's young people vote for the future, and they're not afraid of change. And we all get very comfortable. And in fact, I look at America and its seeming inability to respond to Trump. And it's what happens when a society sort of accustoms itself to a certain level. And we need young people that say, we can do better, we can do different, why don't we try something?
When I was about 14, we had a form master at the Catholic madrasa that I went to, and who used to say, I've been doing this for 18 years and I'm not going to change now. And it is that, isn't it? How the idea that, because at one level, we do want to hang on to some traditions which make us a civil society.
Yeah, well, my last book was basically deeply conservative.
And you've written a book, a whole book about manners.
Yeah, well, I need to get thrown out too.
You old-fashioned girl. But also because Trump is a complete disruptor. Yeah. He has no respect for tradition or convention, yet he's clearly showing deep signs of ageing. So let's go through, because there's a whole lot of questions posed in this book.
Yeah.
How do we solve them? And starting with, coming off the back of us talking about the younger generation being disadvantaged, being dispossessed, should we be giving the vote to people under the age of 18?
Yes, 16. Should just do it straight away. We should do it straight away, and then that should be allied to civics training in schools. So many people talk about young people being passive and not doing things. It's like, no wonder. You can't go and live in a share house. You can't go and have all those experiences that I had. So I think we need to do everything we can to enfranchise young Australians, and I think giving 16-year-olds the vote is a really great way of saying, we need you, your opinion counts, let's go. And look, even the POMs have done it. Well, I don't know if they've got the legislation.
They're on the way to doing it.
They're on the way. Yeah. So we need to do that. I think that's just that's a no-brainer as far as I can see.
In the same way we start testing people after a certain statutory age as to whether or not they're still capable of driving cars, should we be looking at the other end of the age spectrum around not the right to vote, but if we have compulsory voting in Australia, which is one of our great institutions and probably what separates us from a lot of countries overseas in terms of them being able to elect crazy governments, should we be thinking about making voting after a certain age voluntary?
Well, I have put that in the book, and it was kind of a will I or won't I, and I couldn't even remember whether I'd left it in or not. I was so tired by the end. I said to Stephen, he said, didn't you have that? I thought, oh no, I've taken it out. Anyway, it was, so 1 in 12 or so, my parents were in aged care, and we took Mum to vote. She was she wanted to vote. She loved, and we all do in my family. We've always loved being proud of our elections, and just it's a celebratory, wonderful day. So we took Mum to vote, but I wasn't sure. Then there was, I can't remember now because the blur of caring. So both of them getting frailer, you know, hospitals, all sorts of crises. So I can't remember what happened. I don't know if there was anyone in there getting them to vote in that aged care facility, but if they did, many of them would not have been cognitively capable of making a vote. Now, I found out that you can actually put in an objection against someone. So this is where you have this burden of action, right? If you can put in a document to the AEC that says this person shouldn't be allowed to vote. It has to be a family member, and then you have to have the full doctor's certificate saying that they're in cognitive decline. How many people will do that? No one. And in fact, that's sort of buried somewhere, and I was really shocked to see it. I thought, I didn't even know. I watched the whole of Annabelle Crabb's thing about the voting. That wasn't anywhere even in it. So I wonder if we should look at making voting optional for people over a certain age, and that's a way that we can say to young people, it's up to you. We're giving over to you. I'm, you know, as I say, I'm not crusading, but I thought, I hate those books where people say someone should do something and no one puts forward any ideas to discuss.
But the thing is that we saw the pushback, particularly in the Bill Shorten election, which he lost when there was moves for dividend imputation, and the pushback on that, and who drove that. Thank you, Tim Wilson, although he was younger, but he was pushing it on behalf.
He's an old fogey.
He's an old fogey, that's right. And his cousin fund manager Jeff, who I have to declare is an old client of mine. But nevertheless, the pushback on that and where that pushback came from shows how difficult it is to get this sort of reform passed.
Well, I think that brings me to what I've concluded from this whole process, because it has been for me a process. I think we all need to talk about our legacy and not leaving Australia worse off for the next generation. We have all been so lucky. We have really been so fortunate. And when I look at people like Donald Trump and those Brian Johnston and those awful guys, I think you don't care about the future. You don't have a legacy to leave, actually. You're reckless, you're dangerous, you've got nothing. And I would feel very sad if I died feeling that I'd left Australia worse off for young people. I think many Australians would agree with that view. I think we would all feel like, what's the point of being an Australian if you don't go to the end thinking, I've had a good life and I've left a place in good shape for the next generation. And that's what we need to tell our politicians.
And I think you've done a great job in at least starting a debate, kicking along a debate to make sure that we do our best to leave it as a better place. So that's enough going on and on from us. It'd be good to hear any questions from the audience. And there's one coming. Oh, can I take, Brother John, can I take this question?
Yes. It's your older brother, Stephen. Don't worry about that.
And I'll repeat the question, Ismail.
Lucinda.
Yes.
I have to come out. I'm 80 in a few months. I'm not interested in new ideas. I'm a dreadful driver. I process extremely slowly. And after tonight, I'm going home to take a bottle of barbiturates.
Well, that's not the message.
However, I do have a question. So, in Montefiore, there is a whole row, about 3 ovals of demented patients. Dementia, and I have mild cognitive impairment. I fulfill all the criteria of the people who just get out of the way. I was told when we moved my 103-year-old friend to a country bupa, which is much better, that I was the only visitor on the floor. And the nurse unit manager would like to meet me outside because My friend was the only one who had a visitor. So what I would like to understand is what ideas you might have, since dementia is one of the biggest causes. My friend is now 103. I'm going up to celebrate the birthday to Balmain. She looks extraordinarily well. She cannot walk. She watches the same episode of Mr. Bean day after day after day after day after day. She's bored, she's lonely, she can't talk. What can we do about, and I might say that at the moment I'm sufficiently compos mentis to choose voluntary assisted dying. But at a certain point, people with dementia can't, even if we know that's what they want.
Yes.
I'll repeat the questions. And the great challenge with that is that the way the voluntary assisted dying laws are structured, you have to be able to show that your death is relatively imminent, like within 6 months.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're someone who's just grown tired of life, it's very hard to do that. And my dearest friend died last year, and he chose a way out to get around the assisted dying laws because he didn't want to go on anymore, because he did have early phase dementia and he knew where that was heading and he didn't want to go there. And it's very hard to actually make an exit of your choice, even with the voluntary assisted dying laws. Do you want to comment on that?
Yes, well, first of all, I'm not telling people to get out of the way, but I am, except for those business leaders and a few politicians worldwide. But I think choice is so important. And as I said, I think if you've had a good life, or even an average life, and especially if you've got, well, not especially, for whatever reason, you're over 75, you're 80, whatever it is, and dementia is a real problem because they won't let you. They say, well, you can't have it when you've not demented and you can't have it when you are demented because you're not able to choose. It's like, well, thank you. So this is where I think let's push back to the medical people. We can't decide that they need to. They need to say, they need to be able to help us come up with some formula. I think it should be that you can put it on, I have it on my advanced care directive. But when both my parents were taken in hospital with the falls that were going to kill them, no one mentioned their advanced care directive to me. Literally, nothing. It was only later, of course, I thought, well, what happened to that? You know, you go to all that trouble, you sit down. They came from the aged care home that did not give any piece of paper with them, nothing. They were just making it up as they went along. And as you'll see in the book, I had to do the horrible code words to the doctors. I think just make him comfortable. Just make him comfortable. He's ready to go. Just make him comfortable. It's just horrible and sort of phony. Whilst we're all in this scientific domain where it's all meant to be fact-based, yet actually a lot of it was lies. And I found it and do find it very infuriating and condescending to people's dignity, isn't it? Yeah. I mean,
We have a question from a middle-aged boomer just there in the glasses.
That isn't healthy.
There he is. That's you, John.
Where's that speaker?
That's it. No, you don't. I will repeat the question.
Oh, no, thanks.
And I think you've got a big
Can I
enough voice
just
to be able
Can I
to.
just stress, this is my much younger brother, Steve.
That's right. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for just raising this topic so broadly and so wonderfully, because really I think we've known for a long time that we, the boomers, have had the best of it, and we're most likely to suck out the best of it for the next generation, because it's unlikely we'll ever tolerate having a level of aged care that perhaps our parents would have tolerated. And so, to me, what's wonderful about what you're doing is that I think it enables all of us to have this open debate and helps that open debate, but also to think about, well, what could we do individually? Not necessarily whether it's a case of deciding that we should all die at a certain age, but rather how can we better contribute to making those policy changes while we're still influential? Because the thing is, we as boomers are remarkably influential in terms of what we do. And as you've said tonight, the fact is that the younger generation is smaller
Yeah.
than it used to be. When we
Smaller.
were young, we were the power.
Yeah.
But now we're not. Now that younger generation is not.
Yeah.
So I just think the opportunity to really challenge that, and offer alternatives to us as Burmans about the way in which we should approach our next 10 years, for example, I think is wonderful.
I knew that would be a comment rather than a question.
I would like to say something further to that, which is that one risk for baby boomers and older people is what I see as the great let-off, which is to say, well, I'm looking after my kids. And therefore, those tax breaks and all those things are going to go into the balance for my kids. The big thing we had was a fair Australia, where you had a roughly equal chance. So the message for boomers that want to make a difference is to say, let those changes that the government wants to make go through, because the best thing you can do for your kids isn't make sure they have a house whilst everyone else doesn't. It's securing that equal Australia that we were so lucky to have.
Because we can't take it with us.
Stephen, hang on, just right at the back is Charlotte Wood, and she's been having waving
Oh,
her
Charlotte
nose.
Wood, who gave the most incredible rap to your book.
She did.
Thank you. I put my hand down because I was about to ask about the inheritance.
Oh, yeah, good, okay.
How, often the response is, well, I'm contributing to your group by helping my kids, but
So the question is about inheritance and whether we think about inheritance tax. Is that what you're saying? Or
No,
inheritance?
she's saying we answered it. We've discussed, we had telepathy. We've done it.
Oh, I
We've
see.
done
Okay,
it,
I see.
yeah.
So, okay. And now there's another question there. Yes, sorry. Yes. In the glasses, yes.
Congratulations on the book, and I particularly like the bit about VAT. I think it's really a discussion that we need to have. The question I want to know, I haven't read the book obviously, is do you include we need death taxes?
Yeah.
We do have the
I think I have a line there that says yes. Yeah.
Because I do think that
Death taxes.
for those of us who are in the current, housing ownership, we leave that to our children. But if you're not in that, if you don't own a house, you're not leaving anything to your children. And so that very equal Australia that we all had is no longer.
Yeah. I do. I think I can't remember I can't remember what's in the book now. I was in a bit of a blur, but I think I do say inheritance tax, and Stephen and I talked about it actually.
Yeah.
I remember we had a good chat about that. Yes, absolutely.
At what level?
Oh yeah, as if I'm going to tell you what level. I've got no idea. But I think these are
But that's the thing. I
conversations.
mean, the thing is, I think what's good about the book, it's posed questions, and we have to now have a discussion about getting to the answers. And to her credit, the member for Wentworth has been doing a good job on this by having, encouraging a debate so that we can actually go away and talk about it, and not being too hard and fast about what the policy should be, only knowing that there needs to be change. And so I think that's the purpose the book serves.
That is the purpose of it. Believe me, I'm not going to do economic policy ever. I can hardly do sums. So
I think our children's solution is coming to our room quietly at night and putting a pillow over our heads, and that's why we've put locks on the doors. Sorry, right at the back with the brush back hair. Yes, your hand is up now. Yes.
sorry, I was going to ask you about, about Bertrand Russell's contract through time.
yes.
It's a beautiful part of the book that
Oh yes.
What was that?
It was about the contract through time, which I hate to correct you, but it's Edmund Burke. Bertrand Russell said, "Old men are dangerous, they don't care about the future." That was a line in one of his plays. Yes, so Edmund Burke was the British philosopher and politician, and he said that society is a partnership through a contract through time, and that's the contract that I think we have a duty. And he talks about duty to those who've come before us, and that was why he was interested in. He hated the French Revolution because it tore down all the traditions of France. It was too radical. But he was very pro the American Revolution because he saw it was necessary and was going to create something new. And he said, if we don't leave that legacy, if we don't fulfil that contract through time by leaving
Something behind.
something better for the younger generation, our lives would be quite meaningless. We'd be little more than the flies of a summer. That's what the sum of our life would be.
That's great. Just there, yes. Your hand up in the middle of the room, yes.
How would your book, as undergraduate, apply to First Nations?
Apply, sorry?
First Nations people.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah. Well, that is, as we know, we recognise that's a category of Australians who are terribly disadvantaged in every possible way, historically and still. And I think that would be up to them to decide. I mean, that's really what the Voice to Parliament was about, and I think that's the idea would be that they would themselves figure that out. That's really what I would say. I know traditional society has, and I know Indigenous society, that's great respect for elders and their role and their wisdom, and I don't expect that would change. But there may be change, and that's up to them.
But we certainly have a very good example of what it's like when you make things worse from generation to generation in terms of what's happened to Indigenous Australians.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that should serve us as an example that we should actually address that problem, but also be a reminder to what we're doing to our young people as well. There's another question just there, with the watch, yep.
I vacillate between hope and despair. On the hope side, I'll just tell you a little anecdote, and that is that with postal voting and a little bit of help from the person filling out the form, my 91-year-old mother voted Labor for the first time.
Now we know why Trump wants to kill the postal vote.
That is news.
But I suppose the hope question is, do you think that the generation before us, our parents, they didn't expect to live this long? They thought they would retire at 55, which used to be the age. All those retirement villages were over 55. They retired at 55. They were given permission by society to retire at 55. They retired, they lived however long, quite good lives, and then they dropped dead because they didn't have, that was their expectation. The generation that we're dealing with are in that transition between their parents who dropped dead and them who, they don't want to be alive. My mother doesn't want to be alive. She keeps saying it though, she keeps hanging on. But are we, this is the hope, the fact that we're sitting here having this conversation, are we much more aware of it? I feel that I am, because I'm going to take up cocaine at about 75. And that is my answer, because otherwise, you said government's not going to, we know government's not going to do it.
No.
They talk about independent living, and it's a fallacy of language. When they talk about independence, there's nothing like independent. When your mother's living in a house she's lived in for 60 years, fucking independent. She's completely dependent. She's just independent of government support. But they use that language. But do you think that we, because we know we're going through this transitional phase, that we will actually act differently?
I don't know. It's up to each one of us to make those choices. One thing you did raise a good point though, is the gap between retirement and mortality is now so big, and for some people it's fine because they have money, and there's a lot of people, especially women, who've worked in lower paid jobs and taken time out. So I have a chapter in the book specifically saying that's a real issue too. We're going to have to do that. It's a huge issue. So I know a single mother who's in her late 40s, early 50s, rental house in Sydney, 12-year-old kid she's looking after, can't leave Sydney because that's his school, can't afford to can't find somewhere else to rent. You know, there's real hardship going on. Yep.
And those women will hit retirement age and without any capital behind them at all, may well be couch surfing while they're still working.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's a growing phenomenon, isn't it?
Yep.
Couch surfing women in their 50s and 60s. Yes, here, just in the white there. Yep, you've got your hand up. Yep.
I'm really looking forward to reading the book. I was wondering, a lot of the discussion this evening has been about for the boomer generation. But even the younger generations are obsessed with longevity. They're not drinking as much alcohol, they're not partying, they're obsessed with ice baths.
And they're going to the gym. That's right.
Rice pops at 5 a.m. and booming in Bondi.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on why that generation was also obsessed with longevity.
I think, so first of all, it may be that this is a transitional period and that you and all these beautiful young people will have eaten better food and exercised and not smoked, although smoking is back on again, and not drunk so much. So many of us in this room have lived unwisely and too well. And we are going to suffer the various slings and arrows of a very decadent lifestyle. And so it might be that this is not a permanent situation. And then your generation will have other challenges. But as far as for the next foreseeable 30, 40, 50 years, that's our problem. That's what I see it as. I don't see it necessarily as permanent. Yeah.
I yet to see that cleaner living going on in the younger generation in my house, but that's just another. There's one more question. We can have time for one more question. Yep. Yes, go ahead. Yes.
So, with the greatest embarrassment and regret, I have to admit that my legacy is 3 young sons who are all so profoundly cynical and disillusioned that they basically opted out of the whole thing. My oldest son, who's 29, says that I squandered his future and I am to blame personally, of course. And my youngest son is quite conservative and has opted, basically thinks that the whole system is failing young people, and so therefore the only option is to place himself first and to engage in that culture of sort of selfishness and
Yep.
and it's a real conundrum because everything in the way that I've lived and everything in the way that we have raised them has been about the greater good. It's been about sacrifice for the greater good. Admittedly, I'm sitting here in Balmain and I'm a middle class. Really. However, the principles are very socialist and very progressive and so on, and yet my children feel profoundly let down by that system and disengaged. And I say to them, the way to change things is to be engaged. You must be engaged, you must participate, you must be involved. And they all say, it's a charade, it's false, I don't make a difference. They just feel so profoundly disempowered. So I try desperately, I come up with, nice expressions and nice phrases and so on, but I really do feel a bit, at a loss as to how to engage them. So I'm sure I'm not the only person here in that situation. Just kick them out, that's true. Kick them out? Well, I would kick them out, but they can't afford it.
Yeah.
Two of them are with me, one's with his girlfriend, but they're all boys, by the way, so they're profoundly disabled.
But it does explain. But it does explain, particularly with your older son, why there's this whole phenomenon of these conservative young people. Yep.
The younger one is really deeply conservative.
That's what I'm saying. With your younger son, it explains the phenomenon of this emergence of these young, very conservative voices. So I think that's the last question, unless you wanted to make anything to that.
No, we're good. We all need a drink.
Thank you all for such a vibrant discussion. Thank you very much, Lucinda.